Welcome! We are learning about developing controllers and also creating routes. Here's what we are going to do. We'll first create a custom controller and then let Drupal know about it with a custom route. We'll understand the required elements of each route, and furthermore, we will understand how to create routes that can pass along arguments to its controller. While we are coding, we will learn about what we are coding and why. We'll try our code out on our site. Then afterwards, to complete this video, we'll examine additional functionality we could have done. Be sure to open your code editor with the My Module project loaded. Let's begin. Before we jump right into coding, I want to introduce a general, easy-to-use design approach I often apply in my Drupal development. It's 2 steps. First, build a tool. And then second, wire it up. Said another way, the first step is to extend a base class or an interface. And the second step, tell Drupal about it. We're going to apply this approach now to see it in action. All right, here we go. If you have not already, open up your code editor loaded with our My Module example. We're going to do the first step right now, build a tool. This tool is going to be a controller responsible for returning hard-coded markup. Before we create the controller file, however, we need to place it in the correct PSR4 directory within our module. So go ahead and create a directory within the My Module directory called src, all lowercase. Remember, this is the directory in which Drupal expects to find functionality that it can autoload. Next, after creating src, be sure to create another directory called controller with a capital C. Recognize that files within this directory are expected to act as controllers. Let's build a controller now. Within the src controller directory, create a new file called firstcontroller.php with a capital F and a capital C. This is the PSR4 naming convention we must follow. All class names must be referenced in a case-sensitive fashion. Great, let's code. Start with the full PHP tag. Be sure to include a blank line. Then, on line 3, begin the file doc block. The coding standard governing this can be found in the section titled API Documentation and Comment Standards of Drupal's coding standards. Moving on. Enter a blank line after the doc block, and then let's declare the namespace of our first controller. The namespace begins with Drupal, then My Module, then controller. This declares the code contained in this file is in the full namespace of Drupal My Module controller. Notice that My Module is the machine name of this module and does not contain any capital letters. Awesome! Be sure to have a blank line after the namespace declaration. Then, it's time to introduce any use statements. Right now, the only functionality we need to bring in is Drupal's abstract class of controller base, which we will extend momentarily. To bring in the controller base class, type this line: use Drupal core controller base. Excellent. After a new line, let's begin our class definition. Class first controller, capital F and a capital C, extends controller base. Notice that capitalization matters. All classes are to use camel case naming with every word capitalized. Be sure to include the opening and closing curly brackets for the class. Now, within the first controller class, begin with an empty line. Then, on line 15, let's begin the method which will return the hard-coded markup to eventually be displayed. Be sure to indent 2 spaces as per Drupal code standards. Type public function simple content, open, close parentheses, and then open curly brace. Be sure to include the closing curly brace for the method. This line declares that the simple content method is available to any code that is using the first controller class. In a bit, After we create our routing file, we'll realize that having the simple content method as public is what we want. From a page callback perspective, access to the simple content method is controlled at the route level, which again, we will examine when we build the routing file soon. Okay, nice work so far. Let's now enter the markup to be displayed by returning an array with the special markup keys. So, on line 16, after indenting 2 spaces, type return, space, and the left square bracket. Remember, Drupal coding standards say to use the shorthand array syntax of square brackets for arrays. It's a good idea to add the closing square bracket now, so we don't forget later and dish us up an unexpected syntax error. On the next line, again indenting, type the key of $type wrapped in single quotes and associate it to the type of markup, also in single quotes. Be sure to include the trailing comma and go on to the next line. On line 18, type the key of $markup in single quotes and associate it to text returned by the translation system of "Hello Drupal world, time flies like an arrow, fruit flies like a banana." Again, be sure to add the trailing comma per Drupal coding standards. A quick background story on the "time flies" quote is that it is possibly one of the first jokes posted ever on the World Wide Web. It first appeared in the Usenet news group of net.jokes on the 9th of July, 1982. Fascinating. And congratulations, you have successfully developed a controller class for my module. To review, we first made sure that this controller class is located in the correct directory of src controller. The file itself is in the namespace of Drupal my module controller, and our first controller class extends Drupal's controller base abstract class. Currently, first controller only has one public function of simple content, which returns an array designated as markup, as indicated by its keys. Excellent. So far, we have just completed step 1, building our metaphorical tool, in this case, a controller. Double check your code, save the file, and let's move on to creating the routing.yaml file where we will let Drupal know about this tool we just created to complete step 2. Now back at the base directory of the MyModule code, we need to create a new file called mymodule.routing.yml. Go ahead and do that. mymodule.routing.yml. This routing file is where we create routes which link together Drupal and our custom functionality of the tools we build. It may help to think of a route as a wire. A route connects Drupal to its specified functionality. We are going to create a route to the simple content method we just created. So, on the first line, type the machine name of the route. Because route names are shared throughout Drupal, it is important that each route name be unique. So, it is best practice to always begin each route name with the module name. After the module name, type a period, then continue on with the name of the route. Make sure to end the line with a colon because ultimately our route defined here in YAML is a data structure. For us, the full route name is mymodule.simplecontent. Okay, next line, line 2. Remember that with YAML files, indentation means something, and so correct indentation is absolutely critical. With YAML files, always use 2 spaces to indent. In YAML, the white space has semantic meaning to represent nested data structures. Now, at line 2, indent a total of 2 spaces and type the following required key of path, followed by a colon. The value we provide to this key is what the user enters in the browser to access the functionality we'll wire here in a moment. After path colon, type a space, and then a single quote, and then /my custom path, end single quote. It is important to note here that the path we provide must start with a /. This is because the path is relative to the front controller index.php. Also note that the keys of a Drupal YAML file are lowercase by convention. The next required key is called defaults. So on the next line, at the same indentation level as path, type defaults : then begin a new line. This defaults array is necessary because it defines the default properties of a route. We'll add 2 properties now. At line 4, be sure to indent 2 additional spaces from the indentation level of the defaults key. If you're counting along, this key will begin at 4 spaces. Type _controller : space. What we are typing here is the controller key, which allows us to map this route to a function somewhere in code. It's no surprise then that we are going to have this route call the simple content method we just created. So to finish line 4, type /Drupal /mymodule /controller /first controller : simple content end . In examining this _controller value, pay attention to the double colons. The text before it, to the left, is the full namespace of the first controller class we created, and everything after the double colon is the method name that we want to invoke. Notice that the full namespace begins with a / in this situation. Also recognize that the method name simple content has no parentheses after it. Realize with the value typed here that capitalization does matter. The full namespace and the method name must be typed exactly. These little details matter to make sure that your route works correctly. Alright, moving on to the next line. On line 5, still indented 4 spaces, type _title : space. This will be the title of the page when Drupal displays it. The value you provide is obviously up to you, but in our case, I'm going to give this page a title of Simplicity is the Ultimate Sophistication. Perhaps not the best page title, but it goes along with our simple content method name, and I like it. Awesome work so far. We're almost done with this mymodule.simpleContent route. The final key we need to add in our example is the final required key of requirements. This key determines what conditions must be met to grant access to the route. On line 6, unindent 2 spaces to match to the level of the defaults and path key. In short, the indent on this line is a total of 2 spaces. There, type the word requirements : then a new line. On line 7, be sure to indent again 2 spaces and type _permission : space. This key requires a permission string of a Drupal permission. We won't go into all the details of every permission available. Instead, we'll use a fairly common permission of access content. Notice again that the permission string is all lowercase. This is the machine name of the permission. Yes! We have completed our first route. Seriously, well done. To review, our route name is mymodule.simpleContent. It's important to always start your route names with the machine name of your module. The path key is required, and the path value you provide must start with a /. Another required key is the defaults key, which provides various defaults to the route. In our case, our default is to execute the first controller simple content method, and it also has a property to provide Drupal a page title when the route is accessed. Remember that the exact class namespace and method name must be typed here, so pay attention to capitalization. The full namespace is used, beginning with a /Drupal, and the function name does not have parentheses after it. The final required key of any route is the requirements key. Remember, requirements determine which conditions must be met to grant access to the route. In our case, we used an existing Drupal permission of access content. Super! Be sure to double check your code, save your file, and let's see this in action. Back at your site, the first thing we need to do is flush the cache. It may sound annoying at this point, but you really need to get into the habit of flushing cache after every code change. Okay, let's do this. In your browser, type the path /mycustomPath. Hit enter and woohoo! We see the page title provided by the title default of the route, and we see the hello world page content provided by the simple content method. Exciting! If you do not see this, try flushing cache again, and if still no results, you can basically boil it down to there being an error in one of two places, the two files we just created. If the path you entered is not found, but Drupal loads, this is an indication there is an error in the routing file, so check there. If the site doesn't load at all, it could be an error in the first controller file you created. Make note of any error messages if there are any. Okay, great work. Before our work with routing is finished, I want to show you another trick with routing: how to pass elements in the URL path as variables to the controller method. Head back to your code editor and let's do this now. We are going to add another method to the first controller class, so open that file up. What we are going to do is create a method called variable content that takes two parameters and then displays those parameters. Below the closing bracket on line 20, create a new public function called variable content. This method takes two arguments, name_1 and name_2. Be sure to include the opening and closing curly braces for the function. Within those curly braces, we will return a markup array similar to the one we returned in simple content. The important difference with variable content is the markup we are returning. Using the t function, we are adding placeholders in the markup as @name1 and @name2, and we are substituting the placeholders with the passed arguments of name_1 and name_2. This is a great example of the power and usefulness of the t function. In this case, we are using t to sanitize the string. This is an important security issue because eventually these name variables are going to be filled with user-entered values from the URL, and we don't want to let our code be vulnerable to a SQL injection attack or similar. By using the t function, along with the @ placeholder, Drupal constructs safe, translatable strings. I highly recommend that you get familiar with the t function and its various placeholders, and when to use them. For now, double check your code, paying special attention to how the markup element is typed with the t function. When you're ready, save the file, and let's head over to the routing.yaml file we created earlier to add a new route to this variable content method. Once you are ready to add a new route, in the mymodule.routing.yml file, copy the entire existing mymodule.simpleContent route to paste below it. Do that now. I'm going to paste beginning on line 9. I prefer to put an empty line between my routes as I find it more readable. So paste the original route definition now. The first thing we need to change is the route name. Again, each route name must start with the module name, so let's change the later part from simple content to variable content. Ultimately, the full route name is mymodule.variableContent. Recall that this route is to invoke the variable content method we created earlier. So, in the default controller of this route, update it from simple content to variable content. Again, recognize that capitalization matters here, lowercase v with a capital C, because we are typing the exact method name. Also notice that we do not include the parameters of the method in this controller element. Parameters are actually passed through the path element. You can use dynamic properties by including them in curly braces in the path. So enter the path as such: /mycustomPath / curly brace name_1 curly brace / curly brace name_2 curly brace. A critical distinction in paths containing arguments such as this path is that the first item of the path cannot be an argument and it must be a string. Noted. Finally, Let's change the title of this page to Dynamic Greeting. Excellent. After you have double-checked your code, be sure to save and head back over to your site. Remember, a code change means a cache flush. Code changes, cache flushes. Let's do that now. To check our new functionality, we need to add an appropriate path in the URL. So after your site name, type /mycustom_path/Dries/Dallas and then hit enter to visit the page. Hello, this is awesome. Let's do other famous people. How about Alan Turing and Grace Hopper? Wow, such an honor. Seriously though, a great job from you. Fantastic work on creating a controller and creating a routing file, complete with a path with variables. For the remainder of this video, we will further our understanding by learning more specifics about what we have just coded. When Drupal gets a request, it produces a response object that is sent back to the client. The output is typically generated by a piece of code called the controller. Although a controller can be a PHP function, a method, or an object, in Drupal, the best practice is to use a controller class. When creating your controller, you will use the controller base to get access to some utility methods and the container, which reduces the amount of code written to get the result you need. Drupal's routing system is heavily based on symphonies. Drupal's routing system can do everything Symfony can and more, and both use the same syntax to define routes. As we experienced, a route is a path which is defined for Drupal to return some sort of content on. For example, the default front page /node is a route, and so is the myCustomPath we defined. When Drupal receives a request, it tries to match the requested path to a route it knows about. If the route is found, then the route's definition is used to return content. Otherwise, Drupal returns a 404. In the two routes we defined, we encountered that there are three required elements of each route: the path, the default properties of the route, and the access requirements of each route. There are far more options you can provide to routes than the essential options we did. Visit the link provided to examine an overview and details of each. For now, let's study what more we can provide to the defaults key and requirements key in particular. With the defaults key, we pass the route to a callable piece of code. Each callable was a method we defined in our first controller. You can, however, route the request to a Drupal service in advanced situations. Recall the requirement key is used to determine what conditions must be met to grant access to the route. In our code, we used permissions, but there are also access by role, custom access conditions, or setting access to always true, among many more conditions. To fully appreciate the power and flexibility of the routing system, I really encourage you to spend time assimilating the provided documentation. Fantastic! This brings us to the end of the lesson. Congratulations on your coding effort and increasing your comprehension of controllers and routing. We kicked off this lesson by learning a simple two-step mindset for coding functionality in Drupal. First, create the tool by extending a class or interface, and then tell Drupal about it by wiring it with a route. We learned how to create a controller file and how it must be placed in the src controller directory of our module. We learned how to define the namespace for our controller and how each controller should extend the controller base class provided by Drupal. Next, we turned our attention to the routing.yaml file of our module. We learned how to name our route by starting with the name of our module, and we learned about the path, defaults, and requirements keys, which are the three required elements of every route. To conclude, we learned more about the controller base class, more about routing in Symfony and Drupal, and we discovered that there are many other helpful options we can provide to our routes. Wow, this has been an action-packed lesson full of information. As always, you are encouraged to view the resources provided. Take a short break if you need to. Good job. Happy learning.